Welcome back, mental health enthusiasts. We're here on another episode of Ultimate Potential, a mental health podcast, and we have some really cool things to learn about today, and a cool guy to learn from. So I've known Larry Smith here for over 20 years, right?
Yeah, getting close.
So fantastic man, fantastic professional, very well-rounded, and has some really unique talents when it comes to like getting things done, right? And creating things, very creative and programming and things like that. And has had an interesting journey, right, into the mental health world.
Right.
But also just like most of the people that we invite on our podcast, someone who really cares, like the genuineness. Larry Smith, genuineness score, really, really high, and we really love you for those reasons. So Larry, why don't you tell our audience about yourself? Tell us a little bit about a history, how you got into the mental health world and why, and also like a more complete history, so people know who they're talking to.
Okay. Well, if we go back a little ways, I used to be a sailor.
Okay.
I spent 4.5 years in the U.S. Navy. I was a jet mechanic. For some people, they might be interested. I was in the original Top Gun movie.
There you go.
You actually see me as an extra in the movie. That's all I was just an extra. After leaving the Navy, I went to work for General Electric Aircraft Engines as a technical writer for jet engines and how to repair jet engines. Did that for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
When my dad died, we moved back to the Pacific Northwest. I did telecommunications project management for 9 years, was dissatisfied, wanted to go back to school and finally finish what I started.
Mm-hmm.
So at 47, I moved to Utah, went back to school, backdoored myself into BYU.
There you go.
Graduated from the Bachelor of General Studies program and then got my 4-year degree, and in the process joined Telos at 49. So I'll be 67 this month. So it's been 19 years at Telos.
So you joined us at 49, but then because you're, working in the mental health field, what motivated you, especially at that middle age, really, to go back and get a graduate degree and become a therapist? What was that all about?
Yeah, I was a church leader for a while up in the Seattle area and really began to enjoy counseling, enjoyed working with people. I like to see people be able to change themselves. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I thought I could change people because I hadn't learned yet. So that's really what got me interested. I wanted to go into city management and just felt like this is what I needed to do. But I had not the slightest idea of how to do it.
Okay.
So started going to BYU, and then one day stopped into Telos. I thought it was an engineering firm and just felt like I needed to stop. So I did, and the rest is history.
Oh, that's
Started
good.
off as a residential person and worked my way up through the company.
You've been in like 7 or 8 major roles for us. Yeah. What is your current role for us? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Yeah, currently I'm a licensed therapist. I'm a clinical mental health counselor, and currently I'm the clinical director for a new program here at Telos. It's 4.5 months old. It's a high structure, high support program for kids that are hard to place in regular therapeutic settings.
Yeah.
And so the program is designed to help these kids come in, get stabilized, learn a set of hard skills that will help them regulate emotionally every day in a way that they haven't been able to before, and then to prepare them to move on to a lower structured program and finally finish and go home.
So Telos in general has, this reputation, for decades-long reputation of taking students with mental health needs that are generally stable enough, right, that they're not going to be unsafe to themselves or other people, really serious mental health problems, but not to the point where they're disruptive or, bringing the other students down with them. Mm-hmm. And so when we've had those students for, every once in a while, when we get a student like that, we have to discharge them. We have to try to help them find some other place to go,
outside
which is
Telos.
kind of traumatic, right, for a
is.
family, especially if the student doesn't want to leave and isn't ready, right? And so we've created this Geneva program specifically so that we don't have to kick them out or let them go and put them back out into the wild waves of the open ocean, right? Instead, we have a little harbor place where we can keep treating them, but with higher structure, right? And more skills-based interventions, which is leading to the topic of today, right? Which is DBT. They say, lots of people say DBT. What does DBT stand for?
Dialectical Behavior Therapy.
Okay, so first off, we're gonna have to break that down and explain. Give us a little bit of, what that means, what it is, and a little bit of history.
Okay. So the history is DBT is based in Eastern religion concepts.
Okay.
It's based in mindfulness. It's based on centering. It's based on getting into your core. It's based on learning how to be calm. Dialectical means do the opposite of your impulse. That's the simplest way I could state it.
Okay.
We live in a world of opposites.
Okay.
There's opposites of everything. And oftentimes we get trapped in the mindset of either or. And we get that really rigid mindset going.
Yes.
And it limits what we're able to accomplish. It limits our own potential. It limits our thinking. It limits our feeling. And so what dialectical behavior therapy does is it begins to open that and broaden that. So we go from an either or mindset to a both and mindset.
Okay.
I'm working as hard as I can, and I can find ways to work harder and be more productive.
Okay.
Right? I can respect my parents and still have a level of autonomy rather than either I get what I want or nothing
else.
at all.
Right.
Or
my
else,
way or the highway.
right?
Yeah.
My way or the highway. So that's the basics of dialectical behavior therapy. And it's based on dialectics, which simply says everything has its opposites.
Okay.
And we're constantly living in a world of opposites. And the next phase or the next step of understanding it is that dialectics or dialectical behavior therapy is about managing and balancing acceptance and change.
Okay.
One of the core concepts that we work on is something called radical acceptance. And we have acceptance. I accept that the light's on over my head. Radical acceptance says I accept it with mind, body, and spirit.
Like
I'm
wholly,
all
like
in.
you're all in.
Holistic, right?
Okay.
And so radical acceptance says we don't just merely acknowledge something, we take it in,
Okay.
and it becomes a part of us.
So let's say that you have a 19-year-old son who has struggled with major depression, maybe social learning problems, ASD something, right? But you've got a problem and they're home. Give us an example of that in a situation like, say, okay, a big crisis is here, right? How would DBT work?
Okay. So tying in radical acceptance,
Yeah,
the
radical
first step
acceptance.
would be recognizing that you can't solve the problem yourself,
Okay.
and recognizing that the problem is there. It's apparent. We can't wish it away. We can't hope it away.
Okay.
We have to radically accept that our son has some challenges.
Okay.
And we have to radically accept that we are not likely the ones to be able to work him through that.
Okay.
And so we begin to be more mindful, which is the second part of all of this, of all of the things around us. And that's what we begin to notice the tools
Excellent.
and the resources and things that are available to us to help our son go forward on his journey.
So from a parent standpoint in family therapy, radical acceptance of a problem is simply that. It's like, let's stop denying it anymore. Let's stop hoping it'll go away. We're going to have this big, huge acceptance ceremony almost, right? Like
Right.
radically, like we're just going to say, okay, we're in this and we're in it all the way.
We're in it all the way.
And for the son, right, for the 17, 18-year-old, right, who's having that trouble, instead of him saying, oh, it's this person's fault, or it's not a big deal, or I've got it, it's like, okay, I have a problem. I have a problem. It's bigger than I am, and something needs to change, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And when we look at the problem, we say, I am not the problem. The problem is something outside of me that I can deal with and I can change.
Okay.
So that's where acceptance. We have to accept that there's a reality.
Okay.
If we don't accept the reality, we can't ever deal with it.
Okay.
We just ignore it. So radical acceptance says you have to accept the reality.
Okay.
But it also says if we don't accept the reality, then our choices begin to narrow until finally we're stuck with, this is a miserable path that I've chosen for myself because I pretend like it's going to be this way.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really just accepting things the way
Okay.
they are. It's the simplest way to put that.
And that's just one example of dozens or hundreds or what?
Hundreds, probably thousands.
Hundreds of topics that in DBT where you structurally learn,
Right.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So,
So if I could go into the next one, when we also practice mindfulness.
okay.
And mindfulness is critical because most of us make assumptions about the world around us.
Okay.
Most of us rely on the 90% memorized world that we had yesterday.
Okay.
And we only allow ourselves to experience the 10% that might be different. And when we're mindless, we're simply allowing our brain to push us along and ignore most of what it doesn't think is important. And in mindfulness, we start to be able to purposely see what's going on around us.
Okay.
And notice the things that our brain told us to ignore before.
Yeah.
And that's a really critical piece of all of this. But you have to be mindful of our emotions, mindful of our thoughts, mindful of what our body is doing, and start balancing those things. And then look beyond ourselves. We're mindful of what our son or daughter is actually doing, what they're actually saying, right? Where they actually are, and then how I am with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really critical piece. And then once you have that mindfulness, then you can radically accept things as they are. And once you accept them, then you can begin the process of change using
Pretty
the
cool.
both and.
Yeah. And so, so these are two of like the most famous and the most central pieces of what DBT, Dialectical Behavior
Right.
Therapy, works with. What's the history? Like, where did this come from? Do you know, like, is it 30 years old, 40 years old? Have they been doing this since the beginning of time? In the mental health world, what is it an organization? Teach us about that.
Okay. Yeah, dialectical behavior therapy, when you look at the concepts, has been done since humans walked the earth.
Okay.
They've been learning how to do these things and how to connect. A lot of it is based in Eastern religion and Eastern concepts of centering and balance and all of those types of things, being one with your environment.
Okay.
But as far as mental health in the U.S. and around the world, it's been around for about 40 or 50 years, started with Marshall Linehan.
Okay.
And she began to notice how we could incorporate these things into how we do therapy and how we can help people change.
Okay.
And that's where it started. And so the DBT itself has grown over time. And one of the ways there's actually 2 or 3 ways I'll explain real quick. You can do outpatient DBT. And then when you're working with a licensed certified DBT therapist, that's 24/7 DBT with that therapist.
Okay.
That therapist is on call, and you do DBT 24/7. You do journals, you do all types of things.
Okay.
That's the most intense form.
All right.
You can do DBT in an outpatient form with your therapist once a week, right? And you can learn DBT principles, and you can journal, and you can do other things like that will help you. But that's a longer path
Right.
to learning the skills. Or you can do intensive personal self-taught DBT by buying the self-help books and watching the videos.
So there's
a lot
manuals,
of
like you
material out
can
there.
get on Amazon, you can do workbooks, you can
do
find
all of that.
therapists or whatever. And
Right.
and if a clinician, from some clinicians are just naturally gifted
They are.
healers, right? Some clinicians love certain philosophies or certain interventions, or they've been trained and specialized in a certain theory.
Mm-hmm.
And so DBT is kind of its own theory, but it's also very structured. And it kind of makes it maybe easier for the clinician to be focused on skills rather than a whole bunch of like just talk therapy, right?
Absolutely.
So talk to me about that.
Okay.
That specific part of DBT.
Right. So if you were to be involved with a DBT therapist or a DBT group, they would start you off with principles of dialectics, getting you to accept and radically accept things and be able to prepare for change. And then what they would do is they would walk you through a series of 4, and in some cases 5 realms that each has a specific purpose to help you problem solve whatever's bothering you.
Sounds like a great video game.
Yeah, it is. You can level up.
All right.
You can level up.
All
So
right.
we typically start with mindfulness.
Okay.
And we learn the skills of mindfulness, and we teach our clients how to be mindful so that they begin noticing what they actually want to change.
Okay.
And they begin to get maybe a handle on something that seemed very big and very amorphous, just kind of a blob. So we get them to do mindfulness and move them into radical acceptance so they can start really embracing the change process.
Okay.
And then we go into the 4 realms of the DBT. We work on emotional regulation, and that's designed for people who really intensely feel emotions.
Okay.
And so it gives them a skill set about how to regulate those emotions.
Okay.
We go into something called distress tolerance, which actually allows us to step back and in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy terms, reframe the problem
Okay.
and learn how to look at it in a different way, and then teach you all these hard skills that you can use to become more distress tolerant.
Okay.
You might have something like STOP, which simply stands for stop, take a break, observe, proceed mindfully.
Okay.
You might have a skill that's called TIP, temperature, right? Something cold, intense exercise to kick off some endorphins.
Okay.
You might do paced breathing, which is the first P, and then progressive relaxation, which is the second P.
Okay.
And all of these things are little monikers that we use to memorize these tools that we can use that are very hands-on that people can use to help with their symptoms.
So DBT is full of memorization, skills mastery,
Yes.
like so that when you're in the moment, whether you need emotional regulation or whatever it is, right? You have a whole list, it's like a quiver full of, I can practice
tools.
this, I can practice this, I can practice this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then we bring all those together, the mindfulness, the interpersonal, or the emotional regulation, the distress tolerance, excuse me. And then we do interpersonal effectiveness.
Okay.
And all of that is designed to improve your relationships with other people, help you know how to get what you want, help you not be a doormat, and also not be a bull in a china shop.
Yeah.
Help you have that balance in your relationships. And it's designed to take you from this state of really intense emotional distress, feeling your intention or your emotions intensely, not being able to problem solve, not be able to put your finger on it, to this gradually lessening intensity, to where now you're calm, centered, you can figure problems out, and you can interact effectively with other people, which is why it's good for individuals, it's good for families, it's good for parents, it's good for teens, it's good for everybody.
Okay.
Because it really gets us back to that centered place. And once we're in that centered place, there really isn't a problem that we can't address effectively.
Right. Very cool. All right. So what specific, DSM-5 or whatever they're on these days?
DSM-5TR.
Okay. Yeah, that. So you pull out, there's hundreds of different diagnoses. What do you love to work with diagnostically, right? Does DBT skills work good for substance use, for depression, for anxiety, for learning disabilities, autistic spectrum? What is it that where it really, really shines? Or is it kind of be used everywhere? Or tell me what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, when we look at the diagnoses that this was originally designed for, it was anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, some personality disorders like borderline personality disorder.
Okay.
In fact, that was the very first.
So that was I remember decades ago when I went to my first certification in DBT,
Right.
and it was all about personality disorders.
It was.
Particularly borderline.
But what we learned was that if people experiencing that particular diagnosis could experience regulation and calmness despite what was going on inside their brain, the brain chemistry that was going on with them, it could benefit so many other people. So then we expand to anxiety, depression, ADHD that could help people calm their minds. Right. It can be used with substance use. There's particular tools. It's SDBT or SUDBT, I think is what they call it. So it's specific to substance use.
Right.
So it can be broadened to a whole range of emotional dysregulation or distress-inducing diagnoses or situations. Okay. So we're finding it's continually expanding. But it's important to know one of the things it was not designed for is suicide prevention.
Okay.
It's not been proven effective with that.
Okay. So
but it can treat some of the underlying issues that can
lead up to
suicidal ideation.
But not an intervention for preventative, yes. But don't try to do, if you're a clinician listening, don't get stuck in your DBT world if you have an actively suicidal
person. There's other modalities that are more effective for that.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know too, right?
But the skills are designed so that you can use it with a small child and with a senior citizen.
Okay.
They're very simple skills. They're very hands-on. The DBT therapist or the DBT coach will teach you step by step how to use the skills. Okay. And then you'll practice that skill over and over and over again.
So let's say that we have all these listeners out there in the world, and they let's say, again, parents with a child, 15-year-old, 23-year-old, whatever, and they're thinking, oh, well, we've got therapy for her, or we've done this program for him, or we've tried this intervention and it didn't work, and it didn't work, and it didn't work. But DBT sounds like it might work. So how do they find someone who does DBT? And can I do DBT and not be certified? Or is that like illegal or whatever? Or can I be a therapist and have training but not certification? And so give our listeners advice on how to find quality DBT treatment.
Okay. So I'll answer the first question. If we have an adolescent and we're thinking that this would be a good modality, they're anxious, they're scared, they're distressed, they're emotionally dysregulated, they're screaming, they're crying. It's good to find a DBT group for adolescents for them to be a part of.
Okay.
We find that they do really well in a group when they can relate to other adolescents. They can hear the stories, they can see how they're relating to each other, and they tend to do better that way than if sitting in a room with a DBT certified therapist. And
in fact, again, going back to the history of the initial kind of, this is a very unique kind of therapy. It was almost all group based.
It's almost all group based.
Because for radical acceptance and for practice, like, you have to have your peers struggling with the same thing say, oh, no, you're not in reality here. Like, your perception of life is not real. And it's hard to hear that from a parent. It's hard to hear that from a therapist, a school teacher. But when you're hearing it with your peers and you can see them doing the same thing that you're doing, and you all have kind of the same tendencies.
Absolutely.
So not only in a group, but in a group with people with similar issues. Got it.
Absolutely. So you would want to look for a DBT group, but oftentimes that also includes individual DBT
Alongside.
with a therapist.
Sure.
Right? Because there's got to be one-on-one work for the skills and to get to the thinking errors that you may not be able to get to in a group setting.
Not enough time.
Right. Not enough time. So if I was a parent with a troubled child, I have a granddaughter who has autism spectrum disorder and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder.
Okay.
Right. So group DBT.
Okay.
And also some DBT with grandpa.
Got it.
But she's been working with a DBT certified therapist. So what you would want to do is look for a therapist that includes DBT in their list of modalities.
Okay.
And then interview that therapist and find out if they learned DBT from a book or if they actually went to a DBT, usually a 3-day or a 5-day certification course.
Okay.
To learn how to actually do and teach DBT.
Okay. So
that would be the easiest way. And Psychology Today, there's all sorts of things that you can look at to find a therapist in your area.
Excellent. Okay.
When I'm looking for therapists for other families, for aftercare, for instance, I usually go to Psychology Today. That's the quickest.
Okay.
So if I needed to plug Psychology Today,
right.
I guess
there you
I
go.
could.
There you go. Okay. So, do you have any other advice? Again, in your mind, if you can be mindful, right, of all of our listeners, and give them a message from your heart, right? What would that message be? DBT related or otherwise? What's in your heart? What do you want to tell people?
Okay. Well, one thing I would say is that if you are interested in feeling better, if you're interested in being calmer, if you're interested in not being stressed out by things that are happening in the world, you can go to any bookstore and pick up a DBT self-help book. That's where I started.
Okay.
And I'm a person who has a generalized anxiety disorder.
Okay.
So I have always this kind of this vague sense that something's going to go wrong. So I'm constantly battling that thing inside my head. And I found that the DBT skills, even when I was self-taught, were very, very effective.
Okay.
At combating a lot of those symptoms that I was experiencing. And as I become more and more versant in DBT, I've just become more and more skilled at keeping myself calm. So I would say for anyone who feels that way, you can go on Amazon, you can go anywhere and buy a DBT self-help book.
Okay.
And that would be one thing. But the other thing I would say is enlist somebody to walk with you on your journey. Don't just try to do it alone. You need someone to hold you accountable. You need someone to make sure that you're doing your stuff, using your skills, and that person really should engage in a parallel process of learning those skills themselves.
Okay, so
which is very easily done.
Now we're not talking about a therapist or a clinician necessarily. It could be A loved one.
Could be a loved one.
Could be a parent. It could be a child. Could be a spouse. Could be a
anyone.
neighbor or whatever, right?
Yeah, it could be anybody. The skills are easy to learn. You can learn them out of a book.
Okay.
You'll miss the richness of working with a therapist
Right.
who hacks into people's minds for a living. That's
Right.
what we do.
Yeah.
Right? To get some of the nuances and address some of the thinking errors or other maladaptive coping that might be hidden in there that could be troubling you. But when you get someone to just walk with you on that journey and hold you accountable, it really enriches the process. And not only do you see yourself changing, but you see them change as well.
Yeah.
And when you see other people changing around you, it gives you courage and it gives you motivation and it gives you hope that you can change as well. Because remember, this is about acceptance and change.
Yes.
This isn't about staying static.
Yeah.
This is about actually going forward.
Yeah. I agree. I learned a technical definition. I was asked to give a big public speech, right? Like professional presentation. And I was studying this hedonic adaptation is the word. And they use the treadmill analogy that when things happen to you, right? When you learn things or you win the lottery or your circumstances change or you put into practice new skills or whatever to try to increase your happiness. Most people aren't really like, if you put the analogy that you're out on a hike through the wilderness climbing the mountain, right? Most people are really on a treadmill, right? They tend to revert right back to where they were before if they can't make more significant long-term or systemic or family-wide, multiple people-wide changes. And then that's how you get off the treadmill and actually climb the mountain. So it's some cool stuff, new learning for me. Larry, thank you so much.
You're so welcome
for coming. And to our guests, thank you for spending time with us today. And till we hopefully see you on our next podcast, then just remember, mental health matters.
Mental health matters every day for everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.